people get involved in your campaign. They say, you know what, I love this woman, I love what she's doing, she's fighting for us. This is John Villarreal reporting for Conservative New Media.
And I talk a lot about this in my book, but there's another book coming, and I'll tell you a little bit about that tonight, in that you can trace the roots of this enemy really to 1969. See, 1969 was a terrible moment in the history of the United States. Now, that was a terrible year, 69. I'll tell you why in just a moment. But what I'm pumped up about, what I'm excited about is 2010.
Yeah, baby.
It's going to be the total opposite of 1969.
Oh, yeah.
69, this country was ruined. It was just a lot of things took place. We had the Vietnam War. Some of you guys fought in that war. Some of you people had brothers who died in that war, and friends who died. There were 50,000 men who died over there. We've lost 5,000 in Afghanistan and Iraq. 50,000 men died. The nation was in distress in a lot of ways. And the young people of the day, the hippies of the day, went nuts. And we'd never really seen anything like this before in America. And we had this thing called Woodstock. 200,000 young people meet in New York to protest essentially the United States of America through rock music and dope and sex in the mud. That's basically what they did. Now it's interesting, there are probably 20 million people in America who say they were there.
Right.
But there were only 200,000. But nonetheless, that 200,000 was a big deal because there was a record album that was released. I even had the record album. I'm just a little kid and I had the record album. The record album was released, the documentaries released. Everybody who was of that age in some way, shape, or form became a part of Woodstock. And the administration took note. The administration being Richard Nixon. So you got the Vietnam War, you got Woodstock, then you had an environmental disaster, which was puny in comparison to what happened in the Gulf, but it was the Santa Barbara oil spill in 1969. And that became a lightning rod for the new environmental movement, the new ecology movement. And that 1969 oil spill, such a tool was it for this new ecological movement that to this day we have not seen any more drilling up and down the west coast of the United States. That oil is just a couple miles offshore. It's there. We can't get to it.
Right.
That's how powerful this moment was for the environmental movement, 1969. Now I will tell you, that oil spill in 69 was very real. What happened in the Gulf was much, much bigger. But just like with the Gulf, you can't find any traces of it to this day. Do you realize in the Gulf, just as an aside right now, you have shrimpers and fishermen and oystermen who aren't doing their jobs, you know why? Because they can make more money working for BP cleaning up oil that isn't there than they can doing their shrimp boats. That's the truth. There's no oil out there, it's gone. It was taken care of by nature. Well, we didn't know that plankton would eat this stuff. Wow,
Yes,
this is
exactly.
amazing.
Yeah.
Plankton eating it. Well, it's organic, you fools. It's as organic as it gets. Sure, they ate it. So the environmentalists will use things like the Santa Barbara oil spill. Then you had the Cuyahoga River, which caught on fire for about 5 minutes, but became a national news story. Then you had the garbage strike in New York that same year. All of these things taking place, and Nixon, who in my opinion was one of the worst presidents we've ever had. And some of you who are new to this movement say, well, I can't believe he's trashing a Republican like that. Well, you know what? Most of the Republican presidents we've had have not been that great. Reagan was the obvious exception.
Right. There you go, baby.
Because Reagan believed in the Constitution of the United States of America. So what does Nixon do? Well, okay, let's see if we can do a little compromise. Stealing my lines. Let's do a little compromise with these new hippies. We'll start the Environmental Protection Agency.
Oh, man.
That's how we'll do it. We'll start the EPA. We'll call it the EPA. What's that? Oh, you're telling me Congress won't go along with this. Okay, I'll do an executive order. He did this with a stroke of a pen. He made the EPA stroke of a pen. Today, 18,000 employees, $10 billion a year. They are the largest confiscator of land in the United States of America. It's something Karl Marx would have dreamed of. This is a rogue agency, completely unconstitutional in all ways, And guess who was one guy who said we need to ban the EPA? Ronald Reagan. He said we need to get rid of it. Could you imagine a president? I'd love to see some Republican run for office and say we need to ban the EPA. You know what Ronald Reagan also said? We need to ban the Department of Education. Why? Wasn't that his education? These are not mandated by our Constitution. If we're going to have an EPA, okay, let's have a small band of people who, for example, if there is an oil spill in federal waters, they can go clean it up. I'm all for that. You know what this oil spill we just had? The EPA wasn't even called in. It was the Department of Homeland Security that was called in. The Department of Homeland Security, are you kidding me? If there was ever an opportunity for the EPA, I would have thought it would have been that, but they weren't used. When we had the shuttle crash in Texas a few years ago, that would have been an opportunity for the EPA. That was a federal thing. But the EPA instead goes around scarfing up land. Yep. Do you realize in the United States of America, we have a situation now where 33% of the land is owned by the federal government. 33% owned by you and me, federal government, and it's basically off limits. In Nevada, 90% of the land is owned by the federal government. 90%. If you go to Alaska, it's about 75% of the land. If you come here to the Golden State, it's almost half the land in the state is owned by the federal government. Now, if you were to look at the map of the United States, you'd notice that most of the federal land is in the west. Very few of it, very little of it's in the east. Why is that? Because in the west we have something called natural resources, fossil fuels, oil, and natural gas. And every time the federal government federalizes a piece of land, those resources are placed off limits. Why are they doing this? Because a cheap and abundant source of energy is like giving an idiot child a machine gun. Now the guy who said that, his best friend and writing partner now works for Barack Obama in the White House. His name is John Holder. He's the idiot who has said, as I talk about in my book, we need to de-develop the United States of America. This man is in the White House. Okay? His best friend says an abundant source of energy is like giving an idiot child a machine gun. And he has written we need to de-develop the United States of America. He's also a guy who has written with his friend Paul Ehrlich. They mused in one particular book, if we had $5 billion, what would be best? Build some nuclear power plants or use the money to give vasectomies to men? Vasectomies would be better. These people are crazy. Yeah. They're running this country. Yeah. They're absolutely insane. So we've got the EPA. Now the EPA will use a variety of means in order to take over land. They'll use, well, historical monument. Yeah, that's what we need to do. We need to do a historical monument. We'll declare this area a historical monument. You know, once there were pioneers moving through here. Once there were Indians here. Yeah, it's going to be a historical monument. This is what Bill Clinton did. 1.7 million acres of Utah. It's going to be a national monument. You know what was beneath those 1.7 million acres? The largest coal reserve in the world. And this was clean coal, okay? This was the kind of coal that's low in pollution. 1.7 million acres, right smack in the middle of it, biggest coal reserve on the planet. Now, isn't it interesting? One of the big Clinton donors owned the second biggest coal reserve in the world, coming out of Indonesia. Do you think there's a little coincidence there? He basically locked up the market in the United States and opened it up to his buddy in Indonesia. This is what the Clintons were doing. The Clintons also had something sounded wonderful. Oh, it's the American Heritage Rivers Act. Yeah. American Heritage Rivers. Man, we love rivers. They have a great heritage in this country. We love our rivers. We're going to have the American Heritage Rivers Act. Okay, that was great. Over the course of time, they took all the major rivers in the United States, mostly in the Midwest and back east, called them heritage rivers. And of course, there's this thing in our Constitution that has to do with eminent domain. In other words, if the federal government's going to take your land, they need to compensate you for it, correct? Here was their end around on this. We're talking millions of acres of land, all on waterways, owned by private citizens. And they, well, this is American Heritage Riverway now. So we're going to start taking care of it. States, It's no longer your concern, it's ours. Oh, we did this with an executive order. You don't have to worry about it, it's all legit. Localities, you individuals who own water right now, we're taking care of it now. They didn't buy the land, they just took it over. And in the process, they were doing things like this. You've got a little dock there, you've been using that for how many generations for your little skiff? If you want to keep it, you need to rebuild it. We need to incorporate OSHA standards, and you need to make sure that there's a little trail on your property so others can use it as well. That's what they were doing with docks. Oh, that's a rope swing. Oh, you say that rope swing's been there for, what, 50 years? It's too dangerous to take it down. A swimming hole. Well, listen, I don't care how long this swimming hole's been used by you and your neighbors. There's a protected species there. We need to close that swimming hole down. Oh, you've been running boats up and down this river, have you? Well, from now on, we're sorry, motorized boats are no longer allowed, only canoes. This is what they did all over the United States. You can still own your property, but we're just telling you how to manage it a little better. This is the EPA out of control. This is the Clinton administration out of control. This is what they're doing to us. So, why? Why? Why are they so concerned with taking away land from private citizens? Well, do you think it could have something to do with the fact that Karl Marx said this? All of communism can be summed up in one sentence: the abolition of private property. Do you think maybe some of it could have to do with that? Yes, that's exactly what it has to do with. Karl Marx said it, and they believe it because they're all true believers in what this guy had to say. You look at what Al Gore wrote during those Clinton years, 1995. Oh, I know Al Gore inside and out. I've read everything he's written. Not just the books, but some of the policy that he would write behind the scenes when he was Vice President of the United States. Now, quite frankly, I don't know if he actually writes this with his own hand. I don't know. Maybe it's Carl Pope from the Sierra Club. I don't know who's doing this. But he puts his name on it. And he said this in your name in 1995. He was the head of the President's Council on Sustainable Development. He wrote a little guidebook called the Growing Smart Legislative Guidebook. I promise you, every city, every county, and every state has a copy of this guidebook, and they use it. It wasn't law, but it was policy and directive on how to make laws in your own town, in your own county, in your own state. The Greenies know exactly what I'm talking about when I out them on this. And in this guide, it was called, again, Growing Smart, there was a section called Sustainable America, a New Consensus. A new consensus. Oh, yes, that's how we do consensus now. We tell you there's a consensus.
Right.
And you believe it.
Settled science.
Listen to this, listen to this. We believe, he's speaking for you, we, people in the United States, believe that economic growth, environmental protection, and social equity are linked. Now, economic growth, okay, environmental protection, see, those are two separate subjects as far as I'm concerned. Economic growth, environmental protection, and then this thing called social equity. That's called redistribution of wealth.
That's right. In
commie speak. Okay, that's exactly what it means. He says they're all linked. You can't have one without the other.